Greetings, my friends. I'm Stan Houston, and the Sounder has brought you, perhaps, to attention. Thank you. We're grateful for your time. And today I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story that I learned from a South Dakota cowboy rancher. And it's an important story for all of us. And what it is all about is his cattle. And he called them critters. That's right, he called them critters. And so I wanted to find out more about that. And it is a fascinating story, perhaps a story that has meaning for us all. Well, we're going to do that. But I also want to remind you of, hey, what are you reading these days? By the way, one of the things I'm reading these days, I'm going back a number of years, and I'm reading a book by an incredibly brilliant, bright man who passed away prematurely, and his study of technology. His name is Neil Postman. Neil Postman, and find the book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a book to read. Find it in summary, but make sure you learn the message. We'll talk about that sometimes. But today, it's critter time, and the program begins right now. Of course, one of the things we do on the Cowboy Up Podcast, haven't I told you about the Cowboy Up Podcast? Well, it's one of our premier productions under our Cowboy Spirit USA division, and they're in their fourth year, and they have a world-class audience and a worldwide audience. It's called the Cowboy Up Podcast. And I taught a few old cowboys. That's right, a few old cowboys. And all of a sudden, these few old cowboys became great radio performers. And as they said to me, Stan, we did this just to kind of to get you to shut up because you kept telling us to do it. Well, it's been a wonderful 3 years, and we can hardly await for year number 4. And two old cowboys now do a program called the Cowboy Up Podcast. So I would encourage you to think about that. Now, critter time. Well, here's where the story goes. I was having dinner with a group of relatives, and my wife's family, Karen, and her mother is probably one of the chief hospitality officers in the whole world. She loved to entertain. She could start a conversation with anybody. She was able to meet people and love people and be gracious to people. I mean, she was amazing. Well, because of that, the relatives came from far and near, and she would always welcome them into the home. And it turned out that one of the relatives was from South Dakota, and he was a rancher cowboy. And I got to know all of these people. And one time when he was around, and he was quite a character. Not only was he a cowboy, he had his own plane. He flew in and out, and just a real entrepreneur. And he was talking about his cattle, and he used the word, there's a critter, the critters. And, I've heard that word before, but I wanted to find out more about it. So I said, hey, why do you call your cattle critters? And he said, well, that's because that's what they are. And I said, well, tell me more. Well, here's where it went. Well, the word critter actually comes from the English word back in the 19th century of creature. Something was a creature. Now, if you look at the definition of a creature, that's a thing. Something. It's an animal. It's an animal that's a thing. It's something, but it's been created. Not conceived, not born, which of course they have been, but they've been created. So an animal is that cow, that steer, is a creature. And we call them critters. Now, then he went on to explain, he said, and just because we call them critters doesn't mean we don't like them. In fact, we appreciate them. We have to take care of them. Yes, we know they're going to perhaps the slaughterhouse someday, but these dear animals, that's how we make our living. They have been given to us to care for and to nurture and grow to maturity, and then, eventually we use them on the food chain and provide all of those good steaks and meats that you want. They're creatures. They've been created, maybe for a purpose. And so we call them critters. And then all of a sudden it began to make sense to me. So I said, in effect, you're acknowledging how important they are. He said, absolutely. Of course we are. As I said. And that's where it gets hard, he said, particularly for our children. Because the children tend to, when a small calf or even a pig or some small animal is born, oftentimes it's the children on the ranch who get attached to the small ones. And of course, that's a problem because we know that animal is bound to someday be on its way to being steaks. And so to try and help our children really appreciate and love the animals, which they do, but with the understanding that you won't get to keep them. You won't have them grow to their full life potential. They will go and perhaps do what their purpose on planet Earth is. But they're critters, they're creatures, and they're to be loved and liked and nurtured. And he says it's only the bad guys. Now, the people who mistreat their animals. Now, those aren't real cowboys. Those aren't real cattlemen. Those are bad people. We don't appreciate them or respect them, but of course, like every occupation, there are bad guys and bad people who just treat them as if they were nothing but critters, not understanding that they're creatures. But we call them critters. And I said, that's amazing. He said, well, there's another part to it. He said, guess what? Every animal develops bad habits. Horses, animals, they can be cantankerous. They need to be herded. Oftentimes, they misbehave. They pick on each other. And so part of our job is to keep them in line. We've got to discipline them. We've got to make them move. We've got to make them do what they're supposed to do. We got to keep them in line. Because a critter is just like you and me. We're critters too. And we need nurturing and caring and feeding, but we also need discipline and, making them behave. And so that's also why we call them critters, because they have to be coached and connected and disciplined and made to be good critters. And that's my story. And I walked away from that entire story time saying, isn't it nice to be able to look at any animal and think of it? And we do this with oftentimes our dogs and cats, but to understand that there's perhaps not only an element of they're almost like humans, but maybe there's a divine element even in the animals that we nourish and care for and sometimes even eat and enjoy. to have that kind of view of God's creation. I think that would be helpful for us. That's why many people used to say, and I remember hearing this, the guy said, when I'm looking for a young man or a woman to hire, if I find out they were raised on a farm, they've already got 3 ups on the job. If I find out they were raised on the farm, now, of course, that used to be quite common. My first teaching assignment many years ago in a small school in Iowa, over half of the students, they were boys and girls, young men and women from the farm. And I learned a lot from them. And sometimes I'll tell you a story about what I learned from my farm kids in my first year teaching. But that kind of view of life is something that perhaps we need to restore. Well, there we go. Just kind of 10 minutes on a Tuesday. But I hope this might be helpful to you as you look at who you are. And, of course, the fact of it's me and it's thee and it's the divine that oftentimes makes for what our relationships could and should be. Also, just a remembrance of that, one of the books I've been reading, where the woman who is writing it says, you know what, just make sure that when you start your day, you're going to be busy, but her line is, why don't you just make sure that you give God a glance, at least a glance, one of the first things you do in the morning. Give God a glance. I'm Stan Husted. These have been a few interesting ideas and stories, and we're done for the day, but I'm going to pitch, so take a few moments and we'll be right back. We have just begun another new adventure as part of my deep faith and my belief that that's vital to life, and because I've spent many years in the broadcasting business and began in the international missionary broadcasting business, teaching and speaking and broadcasting all around the world, I've put together a program that all of you should use. You all could benefit from it. Even if you are not a broadcaster, and perhaps even if you're not a believer. It's called How to Be a World-Class Jesus Broadcaster. How to be a world-class Jesus broadcaster. And I can guarantee you, whatever your persuasion, belief, or who you are, you'll learn something very significant about communication, particularly using the mass marketing media, which we all have to do these days, and perhaps about managing your life and business. Managing your life and business, because managing and leadership is basically a communication art. It's seldom a science, but it's always an art. It's always a performance, and it's always based on who you are. I'm Stan Husted. Reach out to me at stanhusted@gmail.com. stanhusted@gmail.com. All the best and blessings to you. And God bless all the beasts. God bless all the children. God bless all the creatures and critters. Till next time, bye for now.